Good evening.
Hi. The beauties of live videos. It's already challenging and we haven't even started yet.
Oh, we'll be fine. So, good evening and welcome to our second community action talk. Tonight, we're discussing the local housing situation. We will look at just how much of a crisis we actually have and what we can do about it. We're joined by a group of great guests, including Elaine McDonald, City Councillor. Hi, Elaine. Caroline Hebert, City Councillor. She is the Executive Director of the Social Development Council of Cornwall and Area. Hi, Caroline. Sarah Good, City Councillor.
Hello.
Hi. Jenny and Bill McDonald, Real Estate and Mortgage Brokers in Cornwall. And Robert Coulombe. Roy, did I say it right? Coulombe.
Yeah.
Roy McMurtry Legal Clinic. And last but not least, Juliette Labossiere, Executive Director of the United Way Centre. I'm not going to say that word. Julia, do you want to say that word?
Centraide.
Okay, perfect.
Centraide.
In Cornwall. I knew I'd say it wrong, so sorry about that. And we were going to have Lisa Smith from Cornwall Housing. She was invited but had to decline at the last minute, unfortunately.
So tonight we have a full house. For the public who wants to join the discussion, you can text questions and comments in the chat box. And maybe we could start by each of our participants telling us briefly how they are connected to the topic or why they are interested in it.
So before, I'm just going to do a
Yeah.
little housekeeping. Please mute yourselves until it's your turn to talk so we don't have too much feedback. If you have questions, please just enter them in the chat box. That's for the viewers. If you have any questions, we'll try to ask as many as we can.
Why don't we start in the same order that people were introduced? So do you want to start, Elaine?
Thank you. I unmuted myself. So I'm a city councillor who has been on the board of Cornwall Area Housing Corporation for a few terms. Now the Cornwall Area Housing Corporation has been absorbed by the city, so it's no longer an independent entity, but the services are still pretty well the same. And I have to say, I was expecting Lisa, who is the manager of social housing in Cornwall, to be on the call. So I don't have all the stats at my fingertips, but I can tell you that Cornwall Area Housing and the social housing of the city maintains that we own directly some 1,400 units. And they are allocated to people on the basis of the need demonstrated by their application. We have a range of affordable housing for seniors, and we've got rent geared to income. And we have some apartments that we subsidize directly in the private sector because we don't own enough buildings of our own. And I've always found that a fascinating committee to be on because it addresses so directly the needs of so many people in Cornwall. And of course, capacity is not as great as it could be and should be if only people would pay more taxes.
Okay, super. Thank you. We'll go to Caroline Hebert. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, everyone. So I'm definitely here with two hats on today. As a city councillor, I too, once upon a time, sat on the Cornwall and Area Housing Authority on my first term. But as council, we certainly have a role to play in addressing the housing crisis. And there's been a lot of great work and a lot more to come, but I think I fit more within my role as the Executive Director of the Social Development Council here tonight. The SDC's main initiative is a poverty reduction strategy for the region of Cornwall, SDG, and Akwesasne. And that was approved by United Counties Council, Mohawk Council, and Cornwall Council in April. And that strategy has 5 main pillars, poverty obviously being one of the major ones, but housing is part of the plan across our 5 pillars. The other 4 are mental health, health services, community safety, and community well-being. And all of those have a role to play within housing. And so as we're implementing this plan, we are checking off some of these strategies in our plan. A lot of it is work in collaboration with Juliette at the United Way and Robert at the legal clinic. It is really a collaboration of the entire nonprofit sector and the municipalities coming together to address this. There's a specific initiative we do have on housing right now with the SDC. I won't talk about it now, but I hope I can get a few minutes to speak about it a little bit later, called the Faces of Rural and Urban Displacement. That's it.
All right. Hey, everyone. I think it's my turn. So I'm a new counselor, so I have not had a chance to sit on any of these committees or boards as of yet, but I'm really looking forward to getting involved in that. As Carrie mentioned, as a city councilor, housing is obviously a very big priority of ours. So again, wearing that hat, I've also been on the board of directors with Habitat for Humanity for the last 4 years and a little bit. Affordable, accessible housing is something that I believe is very important. And obviously we are in a housing crisis right now. So I'm coming at it from that perspective as well. For the last, I guess, 4 years, I've been a small landlord. So I've had one rental. I don't know that I can speak on behalf of landlords, certainly, but it definitely lends a different perspective. So I've been on both sides of the equation as both a renter and a landlord.
Louise, you
Super.
might. Yep.
I'm forgetting to unmute myself.
You keep yourself unmuted. You're good.
Okay, I will. I just didn't want any feedback. Okay. And how about Jenny and Bill? You'd have to
They have to
unmute yourself.
unmute.
Hi. So,
Yeah, I think you're going to have to turn
yeah,
off
we-
your
we
video.
push unmute. Or oh, okay.
You have to unmute, and you're unmuted.
I don't know if we know.
We're not
There.
muted.
Okay. Can
That's-
you hear me now?
Yeah, that's much
Yes.
better.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. So, Jenny McDonald, I'm a mortgage broker with Dominion Lending Centers. In addition to that, Bill and I own some rentals. So we've kind of been in the rental market for many years. Obviously, since the interest rates have gone up significantly, landlords are having to increase rent in order to cover their costs on their mortgage costs. And that's obviously part of the issue of anybody trying to find a rental property within their means. In terms of mortgage rates, they are actually starting to come down. We've had a couple of lenders in the last couple of weeks where there's actually on its way down again, which is great news for everybody. That's so I'll move over to Bill.
Yeah, and I own the Century 21 brokerage with 2 partners. What I'm finding in the real estate business is things have moved to a position of instead of putting in an offer with no conditions and going over asking, properties are now in a position where they're going under asking price. So the market has changed significantly and made it easier for, I think, better for the prospective buyers.
So it's
Yeah.
promising. Good.
Okay.
I
Thanks
believe
for-
it's moved in the right direction. Yeah.
That is in the right direction. That's good. What about Robert?
Yeah.
Can we speak?
Yes. So Robert Coulombe, I'm the executive director with the Roy McMurtry Legal Clinic. So we're a legal clinic. We're a social justice hub. We interact with people when they're facing issues with housing or facing eviction, but also when they're having issues with income, which is directly related to housing. So I'm really interested in the discussion tonight. We also have interest in community development and working with other social agencies and creating projects that help people find housing.
Super. Thank you. And last but not least, Juliette.
Hi, everybody. So I am the executive director of the United Way locally that services Stormont, Dundas, Glengarry, Cornwall, and Akwesasne. Like all other United Ways across Canada, there was large transformation that's happened in the last few years that have really propelled us into being leaders to mobilize local communities around initiatives around poverty reduction. And obviously, like Carolyn alluded to earlier, that also means advocating for housing needs. And so we join a network of United Ways across Canada, and in particular right now in Ontario with the new bills that are coming out, advocating around housing needs in our communities. Locally, what that translates into is I actually chair our region's housing and homelessness working group. That is a large intersectorial group that's working on finding actions that are impactful now, not just waiting on those large builds from the city that are essential, but take time. There are things we can do collaboratively now. So I'm proud to lead that group. It's a subcommittee of the Regional Emergency and Strategic Response Council that I co-chair with the Social Development Council of Cornwall and Area, another large intersectorial group that's working on collaborative actions that can help our most needy across the community and ensure that there's not duplication of services. Yeah, so lots going on in the United Way related to housing.
Super. Great.
Awesome.
So, I don't know who wants to speak about this, but let's start talking about what is the situation in Cornwall and SDNG. How bad is the housing situation? Anybody have any comments?
Yep. Go ahead, Juliette.
So I didn't add this in, but I was also asked by the city of Cornwall to be the only not-for-profit representative that sits on the new mayor's task force for housing. That task force that existed the last 2 years has now become a collaborative working group called A Home. So I do have access to some statistics and some information. I might have to go digging for it because it doesn't all manage to sit in here completely. But I can tell you that the housing situation is far worse than any crisis that anybody on this call probably thinks it is. We created a fund in that housing and homelessness committee that I talked about earlier, thanks to some very generous donors. And it's called the Last Resort Fund. The objective of that fund is to keep people in their houses when for some reason they fell behind on rent, on their mortgage, on their hydro, and no other government subsidy program meets them for whatever reason. They fall out of the loops. They don't fit into that, right, what used to be called Chippy, etc. In the first 8 months of that program, we spent $160,000 keeping people safely in their homes and avoiding eviction. And of that money, 25 individuals across SDNG and Cornwall who were homeless or precariously housed. And that I will define here by saying couch surfing somewhere that they shouldn't be anymore. They've long stayed over their waiting time, renting a room somewhere that isn't adequate for their needs, living in their vehicles, living in camping trailers. And I'm not talking about luxurious camping trailers that you rent on RV.com. I'm talking about what you probably slept in the 50s, and they've mismatched a camping stove into that for heating. 25 individuals living in those circumstances could afford apartments, but could not afford first and last month's rent. So we rehomed 25 individuals in the first 8 months, and we have a wait list.
Okay.
So if I can go back to Jenny and Bill, they're frozen, but I yeah, okay. How has the market changed since pre-pandemic? Like what contributed to getting where we are at right now, in your opinion?
I can tell you, Julia, in 2020, when the pandemic started, average days on market, the houses were 19 days. During the pandemic, and I looked it up because I knew we were going to be on this, February, March, April 2021, the average days on market of your house was 8 days. So there was an extremely big frenzy of people wanting to buy houses. We are now back to 23, 25 days as an average.
Bill, we didn't hear you.
Numbers.
Bill, we didn't hear you. In 2021, how many days was it on the market?
Didn't hear it.
No, didn't hear that.
In 2020, before pandemic, 19 was the average.
Yeah.
Pandemic, we dropped down to 8 days on the market before it was
8
sold.
days.
We are now back to 22, 23, 24 days. So we're getting back to pre-pandemic days on market.
But let me put it to you this way. It's kind of, did we have this crisis in 2018? Did we have it in 2017? You know, pre-pandemic?
I see Robert shaking his head no.
I did not go that far back. However, if you want to go back to 2019, there was 720 sales. 2020, 743 sales. In 2021, there was 992 sales.
Huh.
I don't have stats for 2022 because we aren't complete yet. But the number of sales went up dramatically.
Okay. Carrie Lynn?
If I can just chime in quickly. I think the other thing that that is a difference from 2017, 2018 to now is that back then folks could sort of shop around when it came to apartments, if we're talking about renters rather than homeowners. So, you know, unfortunately in our community, we have a very high number of low quality housing. So these are landlords who don't live here, don't live in the country, don't check in, and letting these units just fall apart. And so if someone found themselves in a unit like this in 2017, they'd say, that's it, I'm out. I'm going to go across the street and rent that unit for probably about the same thing I'm renting here. It'll probably be better. So there was this ability to find something better. Now what we're seeing is there is not enough, obviously, rentals, affordable rentals because of the price. And these folks who find themselves in these situations in apartments that are full of mold, that are unsafe for their children, that are obviously creating health concerns, they can't just leave and go to another apartment. They have to stay. And so we have people staying in these poor conditions because they have no choice, because it's either live with the draft, live with the lack of heating, live with all of this, or be homeless. And unfortunately for some, they are finding themselves on the street for the first time in, you know, I think what we've ever experienced. We are actually visually seeing homelessness in our community. It's always been there. It's been more invisible, the couch surfing and whatnot, out overstaying their welcome at their friend's aunt's on their couch, not knowing where their next meal or next couch is going to come from. But now we're seeing it. We saw it with the encampment. We're seeing it, you know, in front of the library, folks spending the night there. So it's visual. So it's definitely taken an unfortunate turn for the worse, and it's keeping people in really unfortunate situations. That is causing, like I said, health concerns, which is an extra burden on the healthcare system, which is already crippled. So it's just this snowball effect, just making things worse for everybody.
I think we can safely say that for the first time, this is not like housing insecurity is not a poverty thing anymore. It's like a lot more middle class people are facing insecurity.
But why? You know, is it that but I mean, is it because we don't have enough properties? Is there, I mean, I know that the prices are crazy. I mean, I come from Montreal originally, and the prices here are as high or higher than a decent quality, similar size in Montreal.
Robert had his hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just continue on what Caroline was saying. So I think as a community, we've done a poor job of ensuring that the quality of housing is maintained. So before, people would just kind of rotate around in bad quality housing from one to the other, and the issues weren't repaired, but people are stuck in place now. So that's one of the kind of issues that's happened. And I mean, rents have ballooned above what, so I know you were saying it's not just a poverty issue, but people on the lower scale of income or on social assistance are still feeling the effects way more than people in the middle class who are starting to feel the effects, but it's not as dramatic as people that can't afford the rent anymore. And now there's a pressure for landlords that's been seen, especially in big holding companies from out of town, to kind of buy the properties and do renovictions or get rid of tenants because they know they can jack up the prices if tenants have been there for a long time. So the renovictions have been kind of on the uprise more than we've ever seen. And people, getting kicked out of their rental units for various reasons, having to live in their car because they can't find other places. But the supply is an issue, but really the cost of housing. And I think there's been an influx of people from kind of other localities with COVID and the ability to work at a distance. That's also creating more pressure on the rental market.
There is a question from Stephen. Is the housing units being built, are current weather conditions and trends being considered to ensure the comfort and safety of residents, i.e. air conditioners? Do we know that, Sarah?
Can I sort of speak to that? Because there's a new bill that's coming through, Bill 23, more homes built faster. And it basically removes our ability as a municipality to legislate green building standards. And those building standards are part of what allows us to create a home that is, in effect, insulated for our climate. And that insulation works in two ways. So in the winter, it keeps us warmer, and in the summer, it keeps us cooler. And so when we are building poor quality homes that are not built to last and are not built to meet the environmental standards that we are going to have to meet in the next 10 or 15 years, we're basically setting ourselves up for failure. And I wanted to add to something that Caroline and Robert were both saying, that, this turnover in terms of rental units, the renovictions, and them going from, local landlords to kind of faceless corporations where they don't have that humanity and that one-on-one interaction with their actual tenants. And unfortunately for, I think, a lot of small to medium landlords, and I know a few of them, they've gotten rid of their properties for a number of reasons. I mean, one is obviously the price of housing, selling them is lucrative. But a lot of them would have held on regardless of that increase in sale price. However, they're dealing with a backlog with the landlord-tenant board, where when a landlord isn't getting their rent, they don't really have any way of recovering that. And so for someone like myself, I bought my home with my partner in 2021. And if my tenant doesn't pay rent, I'm bleeding money. It is really, really hard. So we don't incentivize small landlords to actually hold on to these properties where there maybe, their mortgages aren't so high because they bought it pre-pandemic. So it comes from both sides. It's lucrative to sell, and then if you're not getting your rent on it, then you have no choice but to sell. So sort of answered Stephen's question, and then I kind of regressed there.
Okay.
No, but it's a very good point. I know it's a struggle being a landlord.
Okay.
We have another question here. Milese, you want to read that one?
I'm going to chirp in here for a sec.
Yes, go right ahead. I'll remove this for now, and we'll come back after.
Yeah. There's an Ontario building code that has to be met. So when it comes to insulation, anything that is coming new has to meet Ontario building code. It's got nothing to do with the city. It has nothing to do with individuals. An Ontario building code has to be met for insulation values, for air quality values. If anybody has built a house, there's criteria you have to meet. And if you don't meet it, it doesn't get passed.
But Bill 23 is removing some of those powers and getting people to build homes cheaply on property that is unsafe to build on because it is protected land. Our conservation authorities are speaking up against this. Right now, they exist to ensure that this land, floodplains are protected, but the province is giving carte blanche, and developers won't have to pay development charges, which provides the municipality the opportunity to keep up with the demand and services when there is additional development. We're going to build on land that's going to flood eventually, and we're going to build them to just fall apart and not withstand climate change. So yes, there has been, the building code, which we should be following, but the province is trying to squash this, while the federal government is actually trying to give more teeth to have more environmental demands when we are building. But then the province is doing the opposite. So no one's talking to each other, and it's quite frustrating. And so I want more housing just as much as everybody else here, but I don't want them built on floodplains and without consideration of climate change.
Yeah, I agree. Do you want to read that, Julia, or Mylise?
Mylise is muted, I think.
Mylise, you're muted.
Oh, we can't hear you.
No, I know. I was muted.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so we have a question, and it goes, are there shelters or church buildings already doing their bit to help this obvious social situation now, at least for the time being, before affordable public or rental housing gets ready? So who would like to answer that? Sarah?
Oh, Juliette.
I think people are pointing at me
perfect.
on that one, because it is well known in this community that housing and homelessness working group that I keep bringing back up worked tirelessly for months. And I personally met with the city of Cornwall, with multiple motel and hotel owners, with all kinds of community organizations to try to get something on the ground and functional. There is a problem in this region around capacity. There is a huge amount of passion to want to see a shelter, to want to see sort of that emergency housing come forth. If I'm speaking to Cornwall specific, we were unable to open last year because organizations ran into barriers. We have since taken a step back. We're looking at amazing initiatives happening in Dundas County, thanks to House of Lazarus. And we're working in the very near future. We are going to see similar projects rolling out in our region, including transitional housing and other potential projects. So there are lots of stakeholders around the table wanting to get something to happen. It's like a game of chess. You just got to get all those pieces lined up in the right place to be able to be successful.
But still, while people are I can understand, I can imagine the difficulties. But in the meantime, if you've got people who are in emergency situations, what do they do?
So there is a program that exists. If you are homeless, the city of Cornwall does have an emergency program that exists. And so showing up to the hospital and saying, I have nowhere to go tonight, you will be taken in, like somebody will come and take care of you. There are programs that exist for that. I've spoken about the last resort program. We are actively fundraising for that program because we are actively changing hundreds of people's lives across SDNG with help from Agape and House of Lazarus again, right? Getting people into their houses. So although we might not have that structural infrastructure in place, there are programs that are making sure as much as possible people aren't sleeping on the street. And we had that announcement this summer with the Cornwall Community Hospital and their beds for individuals who are living homelessness, but have, the heavier needs in relation to mental health, addiction, or relations to police. So there are lots of little programs popping up, and our working group is helping to make sure we're, knitting that all together to fill in the holes and make sure we're not leaving anybody behind.
Is the only place that they can go to the Cornwall Hospital, or are there other sort of intake places? Juliette?
As far as I know, it's just the hospital. That's the intake. But then there are like at least a half a dozen places that they can go from there. So there's the
Okay.
crisis team will come in and we'll assess. Is this a teen runaway? Is there really actually a place for them? Do they just need overnight accommodations because of something? Is it somebody fleeing domestic violence? Really a full assessment. And then
Right.
there's like at least a half a dozen, if not more, domiciliary hostels that they can be placed in. Keep in mind, there's a time frame, but ideally it's enough time. It used to be enough time for people to get their things together, to find something more permanent. It's not as much. It's not enough right now. So a lot of exceptions are being made for people who shouldn't be there, but are staying longer, overstaying their welcome, and unfortunately.
Well, and there's also the fact that, um, these services are geared towards a certain amount of people, like, planned for a certain amount of people, but that amount of people is increasing. So you kind of have to reevaluate and try to accommodate more. Yes, Elaine. Unmute.
Elaine, unmute.
I just want to add to that a detail of the Safe Beds program that the hospital administers. The Cornwall City Police are involved in that as well. So whereas the point where a person is assessed and given help is at the hospital, the city police can operate anywhere in the city, of course. And when you consider the social agencies and the clubs and service groups that we have, most of them don't operate all night long. So you really, you fall back on the one service that does operate 24/7 are the police
And the
service,
yeah.
and of course the hospital.
Okay.
So
That's
wherever a person finds themselves, or wherever they're reported to be, or where they appeal, that if a policeman finds them, then that can be the point at which they get help. But of course, the help has to be administered by the hospital. That's the filter point.
Okay.
okay.
So there was
All
another
right.
question about the comment and a question. So many buildings are reserved for low income housing, yet we are told that you have to be on a wait list for at least 5 years. Why the long wait?
I don't remember the number, and maybe Elaine remembers, but a couple of years ago, we had a consultant come in and do an assessment of our housing situation, and they told us a number of how much we needed to invest in new builds to catch up on the wait list. Actually, the wait list, I think, is 7 years, depending on who you are. The wait is much longer if you're a single non-senior. A lot of people are wondering, why are we building this massive single bedroom apartment complex? That's the biggest need, is single non-seniors. Anywho, but they came in and they said, you need to spend, Elaine, I can't remember the number, maybe you do, something like $500 million to address the backlog. It was an insane amount to address the wait list. And you keep in mind, social housing is administered by the city of Cornwall, but is for the United Counties as well. So that's for the SDG in Cornwall region. But I don't know if you remember what that number was, Elaine.
No, I don't remember the number, but at the time I was very skeptical of us ever making progress, because it takes a big lump sum to start a project. And it's only because of the help that came to us through government, upper levels of government programs, that we got the money to be able to invest in the two buildings that we have going on now, one at 9th and McConnell, and the other one to be developed on North Pitt Street, just south of the 401. So it takes a big lot of money just to begin a project. And then, of course, years of sustaining that through community support.
I have what might be a dumb question here, but I'll ask it. Can cities borrow for projects like this?
Certainly we can. And we do. We take mortgages out on buildings we build. Like, for example, we're still paying for the Benson Center. Anytime there's a city building, whether it's a housing, most of the social housing we have in Cornwall is still mortgaged, so we're still paying on it. So yes, we do borrow money. Within a year, we can't design a deficit budget, but we can have debt within the budget, as long as we can handle the debt. if you know what I mean.
There is a limit as to how much debt we can have, though. The province has some kind of calculation. I think it has to do with maybe our assessment value, but we never get anywhere near that. So we could borrow more. It just it tends to be criticized when we do.
But if there's such a need and it's so obvious that there, a 7-year wait list. I'm sorry. I mean, if you're older, you'd be dead. A lot of you were just, maybe they're waiting for that anyways, but you could kind of die before you get in anywhere. Why don't,
Yeah.
why
I
not
think
just do it?
when we hear something like a 5 or a 7-year wait list, these tend to be not the average. These are extreme cases. And what the average is, I don't know, but if Lisa were here, she'd be able to tell us. But I know, for example, in one building, it was a rather desirable apartment building, and somebody had applied to live there, because when you do apply to social housing, you can list 3 properties in which you'd like to live. And this person had listed only one, and she felt that she was not being well served because she was approaching the 10-year mark and she didn't have an apartment in that building yet. But the fact is, that was probably the most desirable building in the city, and nobody moves out of it once they're in. So had she not been so fussy, she obviously would have had lodging sooner than that. But
I'm going to argue again, Louise, that we can't see the City of Cornwall large social housing builds as the only solution for housing. Right. Housing is a spectrum. Housing needs are a spectrum. There are individuals who are stable in their lives, who are able to move into those kind of apartments. And there are housing needs that come way before that as well. Yeah. And we cannot be taking all of our energy and all of our money and investing it in one type of solution when the need varies.
Okay, so here is an interesting question speaking to that.
There's one other aspect of the problem.
Hello?
Whoops, I think we were all speaking on top of one another. So I was saying, here's an interesting question speaking to what Juliette was saying about solutions. Is there any bylaw that prevents a homeowner who wants to help our homelessness to build tiny houses in their yard? Is there anything stopping people with large yards to do more?
So we just updated our, what's it called? Elaine, I'm so bad with all this stuff.
In the Mayor's Task Force on Housing, we updated what we will permit in terms of
land use. What's our planning document, right? Like yeah. So I think it is. It wasn't specifically in there before, and it is now. It will allow it. There was nothing saying it wasn't allowed before, but I believe now it has been amended to make it clear that it is, as long as you get the right bylaws and not bylaws, but right permits, etc. It is now possible.
Jenny?
Within the City of Cornwall, right?
Yeah, I would say if they have a mortgage.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, Jenny.
I would say if they have a mortgage or they're going to look to get a mortgage, I do not believe they would be able to use that as rental income, nor would they be approved for a mortgage on a property like that.
Any reason why not? Jenny?
It always comes down to risk for a bank. It always comes down to the risk for a lender. And can they sell that property if they have to take it back? So what does a lender do with these tiny homes once they have it? It's a complication, and I haven't seen it in the Cornwall area, but in my experience, especially right now, lenders are not doing mortgages for the most part. Even getting a mortgage on a floodplain has been a painful experience trying to get it approved.
So, but what if you already have your mortgage and you have the backyard and you just want to build it?
And so you would do it without telling your lender. Is that what you're saying?
Uh-huh. I guess. Do you have to tell your lender? Like,
So
what if you build a shed? Would you not have to tell you have to tell your lender that you're building a shed? I don't know.
that's different. You're not changing a single family home to a multi-residential in
Mm.
that case.
Mhm.
But
So I
I'll
would
say
just say that would,
sorry, keep going. Yeah.
no, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, a lot of the tiny homes that exist are actually built on wheels. I mean, they can be
Self-sufficient, like, yeah.
they can
Moved
you know,
around.
they can be moved.
But now, how do you hook them up to services?
Mhm.
Right, water and sewer. What do you do about that? Are they dumping it out somewhere? I mean, that it poses a whole other series of issues. And I know I was talking to someone this earlier today about tiny homes, and one of the restrictions was in the setbacks, that once you look at your property, even if you do in theory have room to plop a tiny home or maybe even a couple of them on your lot, electric toilets, is that the answer?
I guess so.
Well,
I know there are some composters I've heard of, but but in any case, when you're looking at the bylaws in terms of like permitting and allowing construction for a tiny home, you have to consider the setbacks, and they're not the same as a shed. So you can put a shed close to a fence, but you have to have, like, I don't know, 10 or 15 feet from your property line to have an actual living structure. So that poses limitations on where you can actually put those tiny homes, even if there is room for them.
okay, but what about we already have what are they called? Trailers, that are permanently placed. They exist on Second Street at the moment. There's an area, and they're very cute. Why not?
Mobile? Are you talking about mobile homes?
Yes, I am. Thanks. So why not allocate space for more of that so that these can serve as homes for, like, starter homes for couples or homes for seniors?
So again, Louise, I'll go back to that person needs financing. If they need a mortgage, you cannot get a mortgage on a mobile home. They may do it as a chattel loan, but very few lenders will consider it. So unless
Okay.
somebody has the cash to do it, which I think is a great idea, it's very good financing to be able to do it. You're basically financing.
It's hard to. Yeah, I think
You're cutting in and out, Jenny, but yeah, I think we got the
gist of
of
that
it.
one.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we did have a comment, Marlies.
Okay, so tiny house is not a solution for homelessness. Using the structures the city has, like abandoned businesses.
Building.
Okay,
Buildings.
using the structures the city has, like abandoned buildings, that can be fixed up with basics for immediate solutions till better solutions get sorted by the city and community. Is that an option, like taking a building that's abandoned and fixing it up?
I can tell you that the city has looked at a few buildings like that. And obviously we have to look at the economic value and the potential for a building to be converted. And we've found a few we're wanting, which is why we've gone to new builds with the grant money that we were given as part of our COVID relief programs. But that's obviously something we look at. Now, the private sector looks at that too. In fact, the former St. Gabriel's School up in, I wouldn't say in the north end of the city, but north central part of the city, it's being converted into housing. So you see developments like that happening all the time, because some of these buildings, old schools and, just look at our post office, like they say people built better then. Certainly, when you look at examples like that, people did build better. And in fact, when you go around the city, there are a lot of old schools that have become apartment buildings. So that kind of retrofitting is done on a regular basis. But it's the private sector that does it, because as somebody said, this isn't all up to the city to do. And it's the private sector.
So I have a question, a hypothetical question. Let's say that an owner has a building on Montreal Road and the building on Montreal Road is not being used right now, not being rented. If that owner wanted to open their doors and welcome some homeless people, could they do it?
Well, they would have to
I see
apply
Juliette
for
saying no.
they'd have to apply for a license to rent. And then our permit department and our building officials would look at it and see if it's a viable building for human habitation. And if so, then they would likely get cleared for it, especially if it's in a commercial area, because a rental is a commercial enterprise.
But I'm saying emergency. It's not like like outside is not appropriate for them.
No.
So if you could just bring them in, like somebody was saying on the chat, are we doing anything for these people not to freeze over the winter? Like,
well, apart from the Safe Beds program, I don't know of anything that we're doing to answer the question that you're asking. But obviously our social services try to work with people all the time to get them in a place where not only they can find a place to live, but they can manage all the other aspects of their life that they have to have in order.
Yes, Juliette.
I just want to make sure Jenny has had her hand up a couple times before I interject. If she wants to speak, I'll be quiet and let her go.
I just wanted to say, because I do mortgages, if someone wanted to change their property to a rooming house, they would not get financing.
Okay.
Can't hear me?
Yes, we heard you.
What about
so I'd like to
go.
continue on that question about converting, because we tried for months and we were in negotiations for months, and there are layers and layers of complications around permits and zonings and bylaws. It is not a simple solution. And trust me, there were nights that I stayed up screaming and crying because it is just so unjust to consider that somebody is sleeping outside when we know there are empty buildings in this city. But we do not also want to be opening doors and putting individuals into a place that if something were to happen, we would become responsible because the fire codes weren't there to save them should an emergency happen. That's not better. We need to do better, and there are other options. And somebody in the chat said tiny houses aren't a solution. We need to be opening big things. It's funny because the latest statistics across Canada are saying there are more suicides and more overdoses in the traditional large shelters, beds across an entire room, than in our pop-up tiny house villages that are illegally forming in cities across Canada. Those are actually safer than our traditional shelter setting. So we need, as a community, and that's what our homelessness and housing committee is doing, looking at an option that's going to come in between. We don't want something illegal, but we don't want to create what we know does not work. A housing first strategy that brings forth respectable housing options for everyone is the only way to move forward.
Yeah, that's what Finland is doing, right? Housing first.
There are models across Canada. We don't even have to look outside of Ontario.
Yeah.
Well,
also, as far as I'm aware, I mean, you can rent rooms out in your own home, but as long as you're not renting more than 4 rooms, you're not considered a rooming house. Is that not the threshold to be considered a rooming house?
Jenny is waving no.
I see Jenny waving no.
Shaking her head no.
No, well, I mean, number one, if the city found out you were running a rooming house without the following Ontario building code for each room, and you hadn't got a license to run a rooming house, number one, you're in trouble with the city. Number two, if you haven't told your insurance you're running a rooming house, your insurance is going to be all over it. Number three, if your lender finds out that you're running a rooming house, they could, not that they would, and who knows how they could find out, but they could actually call your mortgage on you.
So you can't rent a room in your own house? I mean, it's not a rooming house. It's your residential resident. Like, it's your residence.
Well, and also
So
don't
yeah,
forget,
like
All the
if you've
time.
got a roommate, if you called them a roommate and they're sharing the shelter costs, that's totally different,
Okay.
right? You just got to call them a roommate. That's my roommate. So it's really unfortunately a semantics
Yeah,
thing.
there
But
seems to be a lot of those.
yeah, well, and I do like your thinking, Sarah, because I think it would be a great option, especially because now you can afford a house.
Yeah, I will
So
just put a
yeah,
caveat to that because we administer a lot of funds like LEAP and OESP to individuals who are low income. And that renting a room and I have a roommate impacts your ability to access a lot of those programs, right? So it's chicken and the egg at some point, right? Because to apply for any of those programs that help renovate your home, to bring down the hydro rates, to et cetera, it's based on household revenue, right? And as soon as you start bringing in 1 or 2 or 3 roommates, all of those roommates' revenues go against your application for those things. So I'm not saying it's a bad solution. I'm just saying be careful because it can also cut you off at the knees for other assistance programs that you might be needing.
Gotcha. Louise?
yeah, Louise. Well, look, I kind of like to know what challenges all of the groups, including the city, are facing right now. Like, is there something? I want to get a picture of. I mean, and we're getting it. That it's extremely complicated. There's a lot of red tape. Actually, forget asking about the challenges. What can be done to circumvent some of this?
Well, I think the first thing that we should do, because basically it is a poverty issue, is work to see that people are paid more for the work they do. So many people work and can't afford to rent or to own, and that's a structural inequity in our economic system, and we should work to counteract that. When you hear of so many people who aren't working, or not that we have so many people by word of mouth who aren't working these days, but so many employers are looking for workers. And I just have the feeling in many of those cases, they haven't raised the wages that would make a comparable wage, given the fact we've had such a huge cost of living increase, say just in the last 3 or 4 years. When you consider how much the cost of living has increased, wages have not. So with the same dollars that people had in respect of what their costs are, they simply can't afford to rent as they might have been able to, say, 4 years ago. And in many cases, they can't afford to take the jobs that are out there looking for workers to fill them too.
Exactly. Like, they say that you shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your income on housing.
Yeah.
And that is just not possible right now.
For many people. Yeah.
Yes, Carrie Lynn.
So I think I have something I want to add, but I first want to piggyback on Elaine's comments. People need to make a living wage. And in some cases, in our local industry, we have seen some employers start increasing because they are realizing they can't keep people at these low wages, which is great. But not all of them. Some of them are still, you can't survive on minimum wage anymore. We will be seeing some living wage campaigns come across our community, and Juliette might want to speak to that sooner rather than later. But what is missing here is also an increase to Ontario Disability Supports Program and Ontario Works. People who are not working have not seen an increase in years and are barely able to survive at this point. So giving them an increase so that they can actually afford rent and food, not just one or the other, both, is not just a luxury. But what I wanted to add is the program I made reference to earlier on. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to take this opportunity to speak about it really quickly. We have a really strong landlord association in our community. They're very well organized. We don't have a tenant association. and there's a lot of tenants that have stories to share, and we should be organizing tenants to be able to share those stories and to work through some of these issues we're seeing. So we at the Social Development Council are part of a grant that has been awarded through CMHC through the Social Planning Network of Ontario, which we are a member of. So our Social Development Council for the City of Cornwall, SDNG, and Akwesasne are part of this, along with 3 others. It is called the Faces of Rural and Urban Displacement. The program itself, or the initiative itself, has two goals. One of them is to organize tenants, and along with the legal clinic, we are hoping to, by the end of the contract for this grant, we're hoping to see a tenant association be created and be sustainable. And so if you are listening right now and you are interested in being part of a tenant association, we would love to hear from you, because we need tenants to be part of the creation of this association. So please reach out. I'm going to put an email in the chat. I'm going to open Facebook in a minute. We have a woman who's been hired. Her name is Anna Lefrance. And so I will put her email in the chat. So Anna would be happy to hear from you and work with her colleagues at the legal clinic to hopefully see this happen in the next few months. The other piece of this project is we are hoping to meet with over 50 individuals between now and the end of February who have been displaced, to hear their stories. Anna will be interviewing people who have faced rent evictions, who have been displaced due to domestic violence situations. We have a lot of residential fires due to the unsafe living conditions we have. You may have been displaced due to being released from prison with no plan. There's so many reasons people may have been displaced. It could be because of a mental illness, because of an addiction. You can no longer stay in a certain place because there is drug use. People lose their homes for so many different reasons, and we want to hear those stories. So we are offering a small honorarium and a gift card to hear these stories, 30-minute interview that Anna can come to you or do virtually that are anonymous. We are collecting these stories across the 4 regions in Ontario to hopefully, by the end of this program, pull all this together in a really comprehensive report and hopefully influence changes in provincial policies. So we're really trying to map out the face of displacement in Ontario, in rural, in urban, and across the different regions. And so if you want to share your story of displacement, please also contact Anna. She'd be happy to meet with you. We want to hear your stories. Everyone has a unique story of displacement. So if you think you don't qualify because you've just been evicted and that's simply an eviction, that's not just it. There are so many reasons. You might be leaving an apartment that you're not evicted from because there is mold and you have children, and so that is also displacement. It also means the only place you could move to is away from your children's school, away from your medical professional, away from your community, and that is now you're away from the services that you need. So we want to hear your stories. So if you fit in any of those boxes, we would love to hear from you, and I'm going to put Anna's email in the chat quickly.
Perfect.
I'm going to say something is, if anybody has suggestions and resources, you can put them in the notes here, or you can contact us afterwards and we'll put them up. Okay. Because part of the thing is so that the community really knows all of the resources that exist.
Absolutely. I gotta say, I'm like, I knew there was a lot of layers to this problem, and I knew that there was a lot
Yeah.
of things that people had to jump through to try to provide housing or anything, but I didn't know it was this complex, like about the tiny home in your backyard. Like I didn't think there was that many things to think about. Like, this is really enlightening.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention something because I do think we need to be creative, and there is no silver bullet to fixing this situation. And we're going to have to find as many ways as we can. I know one of the recommendations in the draft recommendations from the Mayor's Task Force on Housing is encouraging the creation of secondary suites in single detached homes. We want to densify and infill as much as possible. And in the long run, that's going to cost the city the least because we don't have to create new infrastructure and service new areas. one of the programs that was created recently, like within the last year in Leeds, Grenville, is a forgivable loan program for either owners or small landlords, anyone who owns less than 10 units. They can take this $25,000 forgivable loan program, and what they have to do is basically guarantee to the city that they're going to provide that at 20% below market value for the next 15 years. Once they do that, the loan is forgiven. So it's an incentive to build up the housing stock in a way that is not putting it into like these large developments. It's keeping it in the hands of our local residents. And when I saw that, I thought that's a really creative way to tackle the problem from as many different angles as possible. So definitely that's something that I think is worthwhile reaching out and seeing how the program's been going for them, what kind of uptake they have, and maybe if they have recommendations for us to do something similar.
I can tell you that's very successfully been executed in Cornwall for the last 20 some years. We give out forgivable grants, and we also give loans, and we help people work on the infill, the intensification of buildings that wouldn't otherwise be fully utilized. A lot of our downtown has had its face lifted through those programs over the years. And a lot of
it'd be nice to see people. We should be advertising it as much as we can.
Developers are always coming. You'll see. We don't talk about it much at a council meeting, but it happens at the planning advisory meeting. And unfortunately, in council, they just come through as consent items. And I regret that, because it means people aren't aware of the programs that are operating. They just, we consent to 10 grants or whatever. And I think we should be shouting them out loud, but it's happening all the time.
I agree. Well, thank you for that education.
Yeah. I have a quick question right now regarding the wellness center. I'm wondering what happened there, because apparently that was all set to go. There was beds ready. There was rooms to help out displaced people. But what happened there? Does anybody have the answer to that one?
Carolyn, do you have an answer?
Every now and then.
Well, Juliette has alluded to it multiple times tonight. So maybe I'll let her speak to it.
I think it's important to recognize that when we want a solution to housing and this crisis, it can't be just anything, because safety has to be primordial, we say in French. I don't know how to say that in English, but it has to be number one. We have to make sure if we're bringing somebody in, it's because it really isn't going to put them at risk. And that building and that project, I think, hit some communication barriers that didn't let everything that needed to be in place be in place. It's not dead, meaning I don't think we're going to see it happen there, but I think there's still a willingness in this community to see something similar to that, see the light of day eventually. But dust needs to settle. And while we wait for the dust on that project to settle, my working group is doing a crap ton of stuff. Follow us on social media, find out what we're doing. Next week, Carolyn already alluded to it, we'll be announcing the living wage movement in this region, $19.05 an hour. Sneak peek, just so you know. So if you're making less than $19.05 an hour in SD&G, Cornwall and Akwesasne, you are not making enough to live.
Wow.
And what I love about the living wage campaign is it's really about living. And so when you're working and making minimum wage, you're not living, you're
just
maybe
existing.
paying for your utilities, and that is it. And you're living off craft dinner, and your kids are eating pogos, 7 days a week. You're not eating the food that you need to live a thriving life. You don't have the money to take your kids to a movie more than ever, really. So the living wage calculation includes a Netflix membership, because to live, you deserve those tiny luxuries, right? It includes maybe taking your family to McDonald's once a month. It includes actually living and not just barely surviving. So this is what $19.05 an hour, your family will be just making it, and maybe going to a movie once every now and then.
So I have another question here. Good to know there is something for displaced folks, but is there a crisis management committee for the homelessness in Cornwall?
Do the emergency part we've touched on, that emergency crisis management is dealt by the city of Cornwall. There's a department that manages that.
Okay. And
Okay.
somebody wants to know if the city of Cornwall is still allowing people with empty buildings to not pay taxes. Is that a thing? Was that a thing?
That changed.
Okay.
Elaine, maybe you want to speak to that.
And if people, if a business shuts down, so it's no longer generating income, then the taxes that were based on the profitability of the operation are reduced. So we do reduce taxes on buildings that have lost their businesses. Like a business, it's no longer operating. The building doesn't pay the tax, the business tax that it used to.
Okay, but not the
Okay.
property tax.
No.
Okay.
There used to be after so many months of no vacancy in whatever, that you didn't, there was like a forgiveness. You didn't have to pay your taxes.
Okay.
But I'd say in the last term of council, we've taken that away. And so now you have to. So it's no longer an incentive to keep your building vacant. You have to keep up with your taxes. But there once upon a time, if there was not a vacant, if your property was vacant after a certain amount of time, you didn't have to, there was a forgiveness on your taxes, but that's been removed. So no, I don't know if that answers that person's question.
Wasn't there a motion put forward at some point in the last term? I want to say it was Sid Gardner who presented an increased tax on buildings that had been vacant for a certain period of time to further disincentivize that vacancy.
Right.
But I think that
you often hear of that. Many municipalities look at that, and very few go there because it tends to put a chill into the whole economy of the city. People have different reasons for maybe leaving a building empty for a certain period of time, and to immediately increase their taxes for doing it. I don't know if anybody has actually approved that, though many municipalities have discussed it.
Mm-hmm.
I know people often will raise taxes on a building if it's foreign ownership, or if it's foreign purchased and not being used, it's just being purchased as a...
Is that not being talked about here in Cornwall? Did I dream that?
As Sarah said, she thinks Sid Gardner brought a motion like that forward, and I think possibly he did as well, but...
And it didn't pass.
No.
No, but to increase taxes on out-of-town landlord.
Oh, no.
Okay, so somebody was asking for the contact information for Juliette's working group.
I've shared it in the chat.
Okay,
Good.
perfect.
Okay.
So it is
Okay.
8:09. We don't really have a timeline on these chats. However, I'll let Louise. Do you have any more questions, Louise?
No, I just wanted to know if there were any parting thoughts, if anybody had any ideas, things that could be worked on, and things that even people in the community can do. Yeah.
So maybe we'll circle back to all of you for parting words.
Well, Jenny had her hand up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jenny, you're
She's
muted. Jenny, we can't hear you. You are mute.
Oh, no. I'm not. Okay, I can hear it now.
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
So just anecdotally from clients, like clients of mine that own rental properties, simply because of the landlord tenant board, the fact that if you have a non-paying tenant, it's up to a year now before you can get a tribunal at the tenant board. So they have tenants that are sitting in a unit for a year. The landlord can't afford that, so they're selling the property. So I hear it often from clients and the landlord chat rooms that they can't do it anymore. So one of the big issues, I believe, that's driving not only the price increases but lack of inventory is it's become really hard to be a landlord because you've got no support from the landlord tenant board.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody have any parting thoughts? Things that can be done?
Oh, Carolyn.
I guess since Juliette shared information about how to get in touch with the Housing and Homelessness Working Group, I would also encourage anyone who wants to get involved with the Vibrant Communities Initiative, which, as I mentioned, is a poverty reduction strategy for the region, including mental health, including health services, community well-being, community safety, but really a focus on poverty. That is a membership that includes obviously community partners and services and nonprofits and charities, but also just members from the public who are interested. We have working groups on each of our pillars that meet about every 5 to 6 months to address some of these strategies. And the Social Development Council, which is an organization of 1.5 staff members, can't do this on our own. So we are really leaning and relying on engagement from the community. So I will also put in the chat how to get in touch with us if you are interested in vibrant communities. Actually, I have a link I'm going to share. We have multiple email lists that you can subscribe to learn more about all of these things happening in our community. And one of them is Vibrant Communities. So you can just check that off and you will be kept up to date in all of the work that we're doing and all of the working group meetings that we have or any kind of public consultation we have so that you can be heard. But there's also email lists on community services. So if you want to learn more about what's available, community events, job opportunities, and training, funding opportunities if you're a nonprofit. So I will share that link to subscribe to our email lists in the chat.
So Carolyn, if you can actually just share it to the private chat here, and then I will post it because we're simultaneously on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and on various groups on Facebook. So I'll send it to everyone at the same time.
Sure thing.
Perfect.
And I'm going to be shameless here. It's our campaign. I have to say, if there's anything you could do, you could definitely donate to the United Way. I mean, most of the people on this call know the tireless work that we of a committee has been doing. I am going to say I'm proud to lead this effort, but we get no residual funding from any level of government to do this. So if you want this work to continue, the donations have to come in so that I can keep my passion going and turn it into action. So get us out there, invite us to all of your different clubs that you work for so that we can talk about the work that we're doing and motivate everybody to donate.
Super.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Anybody
Rob,
else have anything to say?
Sure, I have a few things.
Sure.
As we've talked, it's a complex issue and there needs to be systemic change that's going to take a long time to happen. One of the things is increasing the rates for people on social assistance, so you can talk to your MP about that. And the landlords have talked about how broken the landlord and tenant board is. It is broken for landlords and it's not working, also broken for tenants. So we're interested at the clinic to try to start some initiatives where tenants and landlords can talk so that people don't run into large rent arrears and solutions can be found outside the landlord and tenant board, which is broken. And preserving existing tenancies is very important. So fighting kind of illegal rent evictions and illegal evictions. And I'll finish on a positive note because Lisa Smith, who's not here, has been doing a great job at social housing in kind of changing the narrative and helping people. And we're seeing a lot less evictions from Cornwall Housing than we had in the past. So they're doing a great job there.
Okay.
Elaine?
I just giving a thumbs up to what Robert said there. I couldn't agree more.
While everyone else
Yeah.
is giving shameless pitches, I might as well. I might as well add my own. We at Habitat, we're chipping away. We're building right now 1 home a year, and our goal is to build 2. We're going to be building a semi-detached home in 2023. We're still waiting on the official confirmation, but we believe that our build is going to be in Maxville, so North Glengarry, and then hopefully the following year in South Glengarry. So we are in the process right now of just gearing up to start recruitment for a Glengarry family. I can share the application where you can look at the criteria that we do. And basically a Habitat home is a zero interest. We act as a bank. So it's a zero interest mortgage on a home. Your down payment is 500 volunteer hours, 150 of which can be donated from friends, family, or anyone who volunteers at Habitat. And you have a brand new high quality home. It's sold at market value. So it's not necessarily a low value home, but you are going to get a home at a zero interest rate, and it's always geared to income. So we make sure it's never more than 30% of your total income. We also have a home that is available in Winchester Springs. So we are looking for a family in Dundas as well. So if you know of anyone who meets the income threshold and who meets the need factors, the need is really what needs to be demonstrated, and the desire to partner with us. It's a long partnership, like 25 years, depending how long it takes to pay down the house. I'll throw in the information here so people can look at it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Somebody suggested a tiny home village for Habitat for Humanity. Do a little Habitat for Humanity village. All right. And last but not least, Jenny, do you have any tips for people who are wanting to buy a home? Like the houses are kind of high right now. Any tips? Last words?
So, well, your credit score is your power. So if you don't know what your credit score is and you haven't thought about it in a while, or you're really just afraid to look at it, I would say that's step number 1. If you have no credit, if you have bad credit, take the steps you need to get good credit. Without it, unless you have a lot of money, you're not going to get a mortgage anymore.
All right. Perfect. So, in close, Louise, you have anything to say? Mylise, you have anything to say?
Yeah, the only thing I have to say is thanks to everybody for coming tonight. It was great to have you all. And it really is very nice that you take the time in the evening after your days of work to come and talk to us. And I just wanted people who are watching to know that in 2 weeks, our community action talk will be about poverty, financial distress, and how to survive inflation and everything else that's going on right now.
All right. So don't miss it. What date is that? I don't even know. We've been so busy preparing this one. We don't even have the date. 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again in 2 weeks, and have a great, great evening and a great rest of your week. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.